Welcome to today's webinar on strengthening Canada's trade infrastructure. Like I said, it's a timely discussion given the strong desire to diversify Canadian trade beyond the US and to support Canada's wider nation-building agenda. The overarching aim of the discussion today is to hear from industry voices, industry perspectives on how to shape the development of trade-enabling infrastructure in Canada to support those broader aims of trade diversification and nation-building. My name is Marc-Andre. I'm the co-CEO of CPCS. CPCS is a global advisory firm specializing in infrastructure. What makes us different really is that we focus on a very small number of infrastructure sectors in Canada, notably in the transportation space. We also combine technical and commercial depth in the infrastructure space, the stuff of infrastructure, with managing consulting expertise. I'm really excited by the panel today. I'm joined by 4 industry leaders representing freight shippers, exporters, and infrastructure owners operators. They are Ryan Greer, Senior Vice President, Public Affairs and National Policy at the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. John Corey, who's the President at the Freight Management Association of Canada. Daniel Robert Gooch, President and CEO of the Association of Canadian Port Authorities. And my colleague, Derek Stanger, who's Senior Director and Rail Specialist at CPCS. They'll each introduce themselves in a few moments more fully. But to start, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items very quickly. To minimize distractions, everybody participating in the call today, other than the panelists, will be muted. There will be a Q&A session at the end, so you'll have an opportunity to provide comments or ask questions of the panel. You could do that by providing your questions directly in the chat box in Zoom anytime during the session. And nearing the end, I will go through and pull out some of those questions. I should stress that this session is being recorded. If you have to leave, no big deal. We'll be sending a recording shortly after the session today. There we are. So let's get started. I wanted to start by setting the stage. Canada's trade and transportation infrastructure is oriented to the US. I don't think this is a surprise to anybody. You'll see some numbers there to give you a perspective on the magnitude of exports and imports, how the US compares to the rest of the world. This is based on merchandise trade data from the Canadian International Merchandise Trade Data Source from 2024. But we have many other trading partners. You'll see them here on the list. These are the top ones. Largely broken out geographically in the pie charts on the right. You'll see a major orientation towards Europe, particularly on the export side, as well as Asia, and likewise on the import side, heavier dominance from Asia. The big question here is how to grow our exports to those other countries. This is a breakdown of the types of products that Canada trades with the US compared to all other countries. And the real question that we have before us is really how to do this. Some of the numbers that I've heard is between 5 and 10% is probably an ambitious scenario in terms of increasing trade to other countries. Certainly, if we could get beyond that, it would be delightful. But certainly in terms of focusing on increasing this, you'll see minerals and metals high up on the list. We trade minerals and minerals with the rest of the world. Vegetables and plant products, you'll see in the graph on the left, we export more of those to other countries than we do to the US, and a number of other products going to international markets. So we'll hear from Ryan and John, who represent the shipper perspective on how to do this. Part of it is trade policy, part of it is industrial strategy, but part of it also is how to get the transportation infrastructure to support the competitiveness of moving these products to market. And remember, we're competing internationally. We're competing with other jurisdictions selling many of the same products, making sure that we can get our products, Canadian products, to those foreign markets competitively in relation to those other jurisdictions we compete with is really the name of the game. And the infrastructure that will support that is a big part of that puzzle. Just to give you a perspective on where things are going to and from in terms of major gateways, obviously, if it's not going to the US, there's really 2 ways of getting there, marine and air, notwithstanding a rail link connecting down to Mexico. So just to give you a sense of scale of where things are moving to and from. This is specific to international trade. So on the maritime side, the Port of Vancouver dominates. You'll see that in the graph on the left. And on the right, the two major airports, YVR and Vancouver and Toronto are the two major international trade. There's a lot of other airports doing domestic trade, but really focus on international trade. You'll see these gateways here. And remember, the gateways are just a gateway. They're tied to a whole transportation chain. And so that combines a rail and provides road, pipeline in some cases, and really trying to think about the whole performing in a way that delivers on the competitiveness objectives of Canada is critical. So that just sets the stage. We're going to get into the discussion. The first thing I'll do, let me just turn off my share here. I've introduced the panelists briefly, but I'll invite them each to tell us a bit about themselves, their members, their mandate, and what gets them fired up. So we'll start with those representing the shippers and exporters. We'll start with Ryan. Ryan, go ahead.
Well, thanks, Marc-Andre, and thanks to you and CPCS for inviting CME to participate in this. And I'll just start by quickly noting that was a great table setter. So who are we? For those who don't know, we're Canadian manufacturers and exporters. We are one of the largest and oldest trade associations in the country. I believe this is our 154th year, of which I've been privileged to be around for about the last two of. And we represent manufacturers of all sizes across the entire country, thousands of small and large. 90% of our members are SMEs, but we also have some of the biggest sort of multinational manufacturers you'd expect with operations in Canada within our membership. And maybe just to set the table in another few seconds, this is a critical, important discussion for our members who are one, deeply integrated with the US, as you know, and so the current tariff and trade environment has been a real challenge. And two, they are deeply reliant on our trade and transportation networks to get critical inputs and supply their customers in a timely, reliable manner. And so really looking forward to the discussion with my colleagues today.
Good. Thanks, Ryan. Let's jump to Daniel.
Yes, good morning, and great to be here. Thanks for bringing us all together, Marc-Andre. I'm with the Association of Canadian Port Authorities, and we represent the 17 Canada port authorities across the country. These are the ports that are owned by the federal government, but operate at arm's length of government, the biggest ports in the country and many of the small ones. And so we are the voice of Canada's port authority communities when it comes to engagement with the federal government and external stakeholders on issues of common concern and consensus.
Great, thanks, Daniel. John, I'm sure everything you were saying while on mute was right on point, but please go ahead again.
Yeah, technical glitch.
There we go.
Thanks again for including me in this event. My name is John Quare. I'm president of the Freight Management Association of Canada. The FMA was established in 1916. But Ryan stole my thunder on that one. It's obviously an older association. We're the voice of the shipper. We represent purchasers of freight transportation and rail, marine, trucking, and air cargo. We have an assortment of members, manufacturers, agriculture, mining, a lot of big box stores. COVID made us see the obvious, that intermodal drives the Canadian supply chain. Truck and rail to marine and vice versa is the backbone of the Canadian supply chain. And a strong supply chain is essential to Canada's success as a trading nation and as an emerging world player. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Derek, over to you.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Derek Stanger. I've been with CPCS for 3 years. I'm based in Vancouver. Prior to CPCS, I was with CN Rail for 22 years in a suite of different functions, from business development for many years, network strategies, corporate development, marketing, and sales. Before CN, I worked as a civil engineer for 8 years in design and in construction as a field engineer. So this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm passionate about business development and creating opportunities. I will do my best to fairly represent a railway perspective in this discussion, and I too am looking forward to it. Thank you very much, Marc-Andre. Good.
Well, I think you'll find that we've got all the right players at the table to talk about the Canadian transportation system. Importantly, the voice of the shipper, the user of the system, the the users that want to get their product to market competitively. And when we talk about diversification of trade, we're talking about shipper products. So why don't we start? I'll ask the first question, and I'll start with Ryan and John about how do you and your members see the current federal push to enhance trade-enabling infrastructure and optimizing the system as outlined in the Building Canada Act?
Well, thanks. Yeah, so I'll jump in on that, Marc-Andre. So I guess just to sort of set a bit of a base for manufacturers, when we work with the federal government here in Ottawa, we spend a lot of time talking about trade and transportation infrastructure because it is one of the few policy levers that governments have, along with the private sector, to make all of our members, or at least all the users of specific investments, more productive. And that's not true of all other types of infrastructure. There's costs, there's of course maintenance, there is all sorts of other costs embedded in all sorts of infrastructure, all of which have varying benefits, social, community, or otherwise. But trade enabling infrastructure is really the thing that helps our members better connect to their customers on time, cost, and reliability. And so it's critically important to their ability to succeed as manufacturers. You know, a lot of that infrastructure does go north-south for all the obvious reasons. I think, you know, as we consider, you know, diversification, it's worth noting that, and I think you said this in your opening remarks, Marc-Andre, that the most optimistic scenarios is that over an extended period of time, we may be able to diversify almost 80% of our exports to the US down to, you know, maybe 75 or 74 or 73 with sustained investments and policy levers across a range. So I think it's worth stating vis-a-vis our current trade war with the US that the only way to fix our US problem is to fix our US problem. However, all of our members are looking at new opportunities and options. Manufacturing specifically is a lot harder to diversify than some other commodities. You know, there are not a lot of Swedish automakers that are looking for Canadian auto parts. However, around some raw materials and some manufactured goods, there are opportunities for manufacturers to look at retooling in reorienting their supply chain or the way that they're integrated into global markets. And so we think the federal push around infrastructure, major projects, and trade infrastructure is going to be an important part of that. Again, it's a whole suite of policy actions that are needed to make our manufacturers and other producers more competitive, more cost effective in global markets. We're sort of a high cost market. But we see this discussion as an important one. I think we're going to get into it in a bit, so I won't preempt myself, but C5 and the Building Canada Act, I think, is an important first step in that regard. The orientation of federal infrastructure investment programs, including the National Trade Corridor Fund, and how the federal government is interacting with and incentivizing provincial and private sector investment is an important role. And then I think there's also an important role around identifying and targeting, you know, what the top project needs are in the country. And there's a sort of a leadership role for the federal government there as well. And I think we're going to have a chance to get into that as the hour progresses. So maybe I'll pause there, but look forward to picking this up through the rest of the hour.
That's great. Thanks, Ryan. You make a good point about the stickiness of how supply chains are organized. So I think part of the big push on nation building is really longer term, notwithstanding how things may regulate themselves with their trade situation with the US. John, how about you and your members? How do you see the Building Canada Act, Bill C5, and this big push to enhance trade enabling infrastructure in Canada?
Well, I agree with Ryan. I mean, you know, let's face it, for the past 30 years, we've sort of been lulled into complacency and taken the line of least resistance, which is obviously trading with the US. And that's not a bad thing until the recent crisis that we've had. And we've come to a realization that maybe we need to diversify, not necessarily go away from the US, but we need to look at other markets so we grow the pie, not divide the existing pie. Having said that, the bill that is before us is a good first start, but this is not the first time that ideas on expanding or improving the supply chain have been put forward. More than a decade ago, the Emerson report came out, and it looked at ways to improve the supply chain. The government at the day pretty well ignored it. We had a crisis with COVID a few years back. Supply chain task force was tasked with coming up with recommendations. They came up with a report. Coincidentally, many of those recommendations were similar to what was in the Emerson report. We didn't do much about it, and it took a literal trade crisis to get the current government to do something. We're very encouraged by that because we've been saying the same thing over the last decades, and finally someone is listening. Now, is this a panacea? Is this going to fix all our problems? Absolutely not. But you have to take a first step if you're going to, start a journey. And I think this is a good first step. There's a lot of discussion about the types of projects, and they're already sort of in the pipeline, and et cetera, et cetera. Those are kind of minor details that we're going to get to, but this can't be a one and done, but is an excellent first step. And shippers across the country are very pleased with the emphasis that's now being put on the supply chain, the Canadian supply chain.
Good. As you say, it's a good first step. We'll get into some of those longer term next steps a little later. Daniel, how about the Canadian Port Authority perspective?
Well, CPAs are not just a part of critical component of supply chain infrastructure. They're also instruments of public policy, given the federal nature of the port authorities. So, as the country is focused like never before, perhaps on trade diversification, we see this as a tremendous opportunity. Goods diverted from the U.S. are much more likely. Most goods and commodities go by sea if they're going to overseas markets, and so this means a lot of work for port authorities. There was a Scotiabank report that came out in the last few weeks that found for every 10% share of trade currently goes to the US that gets redirected elsewhere, the share of goods leaving the country from ports increases by 5%. That's actually where some of our container ports start to find they're hitting capacity limits. So we really do need to get on with some of the projects that are underway, and we're pleased to see Contrecoeur make the first list. So I'd say Building Canada aligns with our priorities, treating ports as nation-building assets that strengthen trade diversification. We're optimistic, but there are other ways that we are looking to work with the federal government in terms of ports modernization, including modernized borrowing. So this is one component, but there's other work to be done.
Good. Thanks, Daniel. And connecting to a lot of those ports are railways. Derek, give us your sense of the current federal push to enhance trade enabling infrastructure and the view from a rail expert standpoint.
Thank you, Marc-Andre. I think through the conversation, I reflect on, and over the past few days, I reflect on complexity. Complexity with proponents who are wanting to develop projects. And most of my activity and roles have been largely looking at export opportunities and some import at port and terminals in the railway. But the complexity is all-consuming, and it takes years. And we all know so many examples of projects and proponents that frankly, they gave up. And even in my role, we'd work together as a railway with potential proponents for years. And, they spend millions and millions of dollars and then finally say, okay, well, this is too complex. The hurdles, the bars are changing, and, we can't go on like this. So they stop. And from a railway perspective, the network, the projects, the low-hanging fruit of capacity and things that can be done has largely been eroded. So the projects that are left are, again, complex and very costly. And what's interesting, complexity doesn't just mean financial significance and complexity. It can be environmental as well, for example. So I think a perspective is anything that helps bring clarity and accelerates and simplifies process is a good thing. And fundamentally, that's what this bill proposes to do. So I can suppose that this is viewed as a good thing by the private sector and the railways. But I do agree this is the beginning of a journey. And John, you mentioned journey. And I think this is critical not to be tied to an election cycle. I go back to the issue of complexity and step change in capacity. How do you overcome these big obstacles? in this day and age, you can't do it in 4 years. These things take 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years to complete. So I reflect, those would be my initial reflections. It has, whatever process is created, it has to be enduring through an election cycle with a consistent, sustained push, a clear vision. And so I think the program is commendable as a first start and as a journey.
Yeah, good. And certainly a big focus of the Act, the Building Canada Act, the Major Project Office is speeding up approvals, coordinating approvals.
Yes.
So I think that's intended to do some of that. But as I think we're saying, there's consensus. I mean, this is the beginning of a journey, the beginning of a series of steps.
Yeah, Marc-Andre, if I could just
Yeah.
sort of jump in on a couple of things that my colleague said. Just first, Derek, to pick up on what you said around all of the projects that never were because of the processes that exist. I think there's a role for organizations like those of us on the call and others to help create that enduring atmosphere, which is to actually try to quantify what the costs are to the Canadian economy of all this. And perhaps there's a global infrastructure and transportation management consulting firm that could help develop some of that work, but really, try to quantify the costs and the missed opportunity for Canadians and Canadian leaders about what that has meant and what the potential could have been had we had an environment where a lot of these things could proceed. I think that can help build some of that momentum. And then just to step back on C5 and maybe for any the call participants that aren't directly familiar with C5, or at least how we talk about that terminology. I mean, what this is intended to do as a bill is basically a federal workaround for all the other federal regulatory and legal requirements that projects have to go through. So it's sort of a tacit acknowledgement that the current system does not work and is not currently fit for purpose. And then it is a way to a process to identify both sort of through some sort of political threshold. We saw the premiers advocating and lobbying directly to the prime minister, and then through some other process, official-based threshold about when a project is ready to get onto a list, which then sort of gives you access to be designated as a project. The governor and council can, declare you national interest. That gives you ability to be fast-tracked, potentially exempt from federal laws and regulations. So I think why you're hearing some what I would describe as cautious optimism from the folks here is, on one hand, that is a net good. We all, I think, would share and acknowledge that the current system does not work, and in the short term, especially when we're facing some economic peril, given the unjustified actions from our neighbor from the south, that we need to get serious about advancing some of these projects as quickly as possible. I think over the medium and long term, though, we're going to need to fix all of the underlying problems that have created the need for C5 in the first place, which is to say, we want an environment where private capital is coming to Canada, and not just because they think they can get a project through a process onto a list that then declares it of national interest, but because there's an environment in which we are a productive, ambitious economy that has set up all of our regulatory, legal, and tax systems to say, we want you investing here. We've got the best people, the best manufacturers, the best shippers, the best rail lines, the best ports to manufacture terrific products and sell them within our country and abroad. And so our hope is that C5 is, again, to go back to what I said the very first time, a first step in what needs to be a long sustained and in some ways challenging effort to reorient the regulatory and approval processes in this country, so that all projects and not just sort of the select few, which we are very supportive of, will end up on this sort of list.
Right. Thanks, Ryan. Maybe I'll do a roundtable. Just get a sense of what you and your members see as the biggest needs and opportunities that C5 opens the door to. What should we be tackling first as a country from a trade enabling infrastructure standpoint? John, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think what the first thing we need to do is maximize the assets that we currently have. 20% of the rail network in Canada is short lines. If we're going to have projects in the north, probably short lines are going to be the first mile, last mile going to the main CPKC sort of network. So we need to put some money or some thought into how are we going to develop those so that we have a more integrated national rail system. We have St. Lawrence Seaway. It's underutilized. It goes to the middle of the continent to Montreal or beyond. Let's see if we can maximize that. Let's see what more we can do with that instead of reinventing the wheel. We have our ports are ports. We need to put more money into those ports. Roberts Bank 2, it's going to come online in decades. Contrecoeur is much more current. All ports need to be developed, because if we are going to go east-west, as Daniel said, it's going out through the ports. So they need to be expanded. Existing pipeline, let's make sure it's maxed out before we start building a new pipeline, unless, looking at the feasibility. So let's get going with what we currently have, maximize that. Then we need to start looking at the other parts of the infrastructure, bottlenecks, choke points on the rail system. If there need to be more intermodal yards or yards built outside of cities, let's start doing that. Ports are already expanding. We need to do that. We may be looking to Churchill. That could be an expansion point also. So we need to do that kind of stuff. But as Ryan said, we need to make the conditions correct for outside investment to come in and make those projects. The government can't spend all the money to do all these things. We need to have outside money coming in. And to do that, it has to be a reasonable amount of time to get a return on your investment. Just recently in news, Lac-Mégantic happened more than a decade ago. The railway is finally going to the agency, the Canadian Transportation Agency, for Section 95, the authorization to build and construct a rail line. It's taken more than a decade to get that project, 13-kilometer project, done. It's not even started. It has to go through the approval process. We need to speed things up. So I think that's very important. I think that's the kind of progression we need to keep up with.
Yeah, I really like your point about getting more out of what we've got already. Railways, ports, the Seaway, those are nation-building projects of years past. And it is, I would think, a lot faster to reinvest in them to get them working better and make better use of that capacity than building brand new things. Now, we need brand new things as well. But from a complementary standpoint, there's a lot there already that we could work with. And when it comes to private sector investment, a lot of those assets are already owned and operated, and the investments is private capital. How do we make it easier? I think I like that point a lot, John.
Just one extra, I mentioned Trans-Canada Highway. There's parts of the Trans-Canada Highway that are not divided across the country. We need to have a better road system across the country.
Yeah, Daniel?
Yeah, look, I agree with everything I've heard so far. We do have assets that are underutilized. The St. Lawrence Great Lakes system is a tremendous asset that brings you right into the heart of North America. And the changes that we need to be systemic, because we do have a global reputation issue to be concerned about as well. At Port Authorities, we did a study with you last year, Marc-Andre, looking at the long-term needs. Investment needs at Canada's Port Authorities. Now, this was pre-Trump, so this was just based on what we needed to maintain existing infrastructure, to decarbonize, to get greater efficiency out of existing resources, as well as expansion. And what we saw was when we did the study in 2040, we're looking at anywhere from $15 to $20 billion in investments that are needed by the port authorities themselves to enable the private investments that are made by our partners. And so even before this, we were engaged with the federal government to modernize aspects of the model that have become a bit outdated, in particular around how to finance projects. CPAs are under hard limits on their borrowing. They do not adjust as revenues and business environment improves. It requires a very human-intensive, cost-intensive process to get those limits raised, and it can take a year, 2 years, 3 years, which is actually pretty quick in terms of government, but not quick in terms of the private sector and what a globally responsive Canadian supply chain needs to be. So a lot of work that needs to be done, but it does need to be systemic as well. There is a risk that we focus our efforts and our resources on a narrow list of of projects and not go beyond that. $5 billion in the Trade Diversification Corridors Fund is good, but it's not going to go that far. So, our ports are looking to make it easier for them to finance projects themselves. And beyond the projects on that list, we need all projects to be moving forward more quickly as well. I was heartened that officials of government at our conference in Halifax last week said they do hope that the changes that they're going to be undertaking to move these projects along can benefit other projects, so that we can have 2-year timelines for all projects and not just a select few. It's an ambitious goal. There's a lot of work to be done to reach it. But it's too soon for us to be disappointed. We're cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, I like that you're referring to some of that soft stuff, like modernizing borrowing limits. I mean, if there's an interest in moving forward with investment, and there's just these soft hurdles, maybe those are low-hanging fruit in a sense.
It's a form of red tape, and the government's committed to addressing, tackling red tape straight on. So we're very much encouraged by that.
Perfect. Derek, how about you? Thoughts on kind of the low-hanging fruit, key priorities, key needs to prioritize in our thinking?
Certainly, I think there's number one, there's urgency. And I in my role, I often reflect of step changes. What can be done in the short term, and how it's also about de-risking. There's a timing mismatch between what the private sector can look forward to in the range of, say, 5 years. They're looking for a return on investments in that range of period. But big public infrastructure or big infrastructure is based on a much longer investment time horizon, 30 years, for example. So there's a timing mismatch in addressing these big lumpy projects that need to be addressed. In Canada, we've been living off infrastructure that was constructed in the early 1900s, when in a different era, of course. And how do we move beyond that? So I think with government helping with a clear vision and a plan, coalescing key stakeholders, allowing private sector, municipalities and cities and provinces to make the project selection happen. They're picking the projects. The federal government is helping guide that and lead it, again, on a sustained basis. Many things can be done. And there's direct investments in our corridors, but there's also indirect investments in, for example, critical grade separations that will allow the railways to more effectively expand. And in railways, of course, it's siding extensions, new sidings, double track. And with a program of critical grade separations, that allows the private sector to expand and scale. So that's one opportunity. Also, through the course of history, a lot of our at-grade crossings there are significant safety concerns. So, if there was a program to address these sorts of things to help facilitate development and construction of these critical at-grade crossings, that unencumbers the rail corridors. So again, it's sort of an indirect opportunity and perhaps something in the short term. So in the Northern Corridor, we have how do we get to scalability in the Northern Corridor to Prince Rupert, for example. In the Southern Corridor to Vancouver, it's a story of probably resiliency. There are opportunities to look at our main and key yard portals. Where do we have legacy single track structures where we incrementally sort of eke out more and more capacity? I think these are good examples of projects that can be looked at. And then finally, I'd reflect on the percentage of double track through the heart of our rail network, which is basically Edmonton, Calgary to Winnipeg. Can there be a program created to increase that percentage of double track, creating more resiliency, latent capacity for the system to be more reliable and scalable, frankly.
You've used the word resilience a couple of times. Where do you, and I'll ask this, the question of the others, see resilience as fitting into this nation building agenda?
It's critical, and it's expensive. Resiliency is expensive. I see it as sort of latent capacity. We incrementally use our historical infrastructure more and more and more, and we're chipping away at that buffer capacity. And I'm thinking broadly in the supply chain, but we chip away at that. to a point where it becomes harder and harder to recover. And that's why I sort of keep going back to complexity and step changes of capacity to unlock expansion. And so we get out of incrementalism in our work and our thinking. And it's a nebulous thing. It can be, capacity is nebulous. It can mean many things to many people. Resiliency is the same, but I've always reflected on resiliency as scale, scalability, optionality, redundancy, safety, and efficiency. It's a formula of all of these things, and in order to create capacity, and then and resiliency. And you don't want to fill it right up again, because then you're at the same level of utilization. It has to be managed and thought of carefully. But I would say those are the ingredients of resiliency from a rail perspective. And it allows for faster recoverability. It allows the rail network to deal with, I call it surging, bunching, and recovery. The reality is traffic will surge, traffic will naturally bunch through rail operations, and there will be issues at origin, destination, en route, and the system needs to be able to recover.
Yeah.
And in order to recover, you need that latent capacity.
Yeah, which is interesting. We were talking about private capital, private investment. As you said, resilience is expensive, but for Ryan's members, for example, reliability is critical. So how do we get that mix right between making investments in resilience to provide that reliable service? Ryan, maybe you have some thoughts on that broader question of resilience and how it fits into kind of the wider nation building agenda.
Well, I do, and I think I mean, in many ways, it dials back to how much friction do regulators and governments put in the way of the private sector of making those investments in resilience? Because whether you're a shipper or you're a manufacturer, I mean, you understand how important that resilience is to your customer, to assuredness that they're going to receive what they need when they need it. We've sort of moved fairly far back again towards just-in-time supply chains, notwithstanding all the other terminology that we all started talking about in the context of COVID. I mean, one example of resilience in action when the private sector isn't stuck waiting around for government approvals. I grew up in rural Alberta, a couple hours northwest of Edmonton, and there is was a beautiful 1,200-foot wooden trestle bridge near Marithorpe, Alberta that I can't remember how long, it's at least a decade now, if not more, was lit on fire through a case of arson, and it burned down. Really beautiful, picturesque. If you Google Marithorpe Trestle Bridge, you see pictures of this poor thing on fire. So that was on a CN branch line between Marithorpe and Whitecourt. And while the fire was still burning, CN started moving sort of replacement products that are stashed around the line towards Marithorpe, and working, I think it was 20 days straight. They rebuilt this 1,200-foot long stretch of bridge so that service could be restored less than 3 weeks after it had burnt down. That is resilience in action, because there was there wasn't a new project, there was no government regulator to run this by it, or as far as I know. But you're talking about a 50-foot tall, 1,200-foot bridge, again rebuilt in 3 weeks. It's pretty exceptional. So for resilience, there's a range of policy considerations around the regulatory thing, but I think when we think of resilience, we also need to think of other related policy areas, such as the current labor environment in Canada. You can have all the right infrastructure in the right place, but if it's not moving because of labor disruptions, we're just, we have a lack of resilience in another way. Prior to the current trade dispute with the US, most of the calls that I was getting from our counterparts in the US at the National Association of Manufacturers were on a weekly basis to say, we're hearing from our members that they can't get the inputs they need from Canada because some godforsaken labor disruption is underway, and what's going on up there. So I think resilience is, again, like all these questions, it's one we have to look at from a holistic perspective, but all the barriers and opportunities to make sure that our products are moving as quickly and reliably as they can.
Yeah. Good. I'll ask a different question, and if the panelists want to come back to the question of resilience and priorities, you're welcome to do it. Just practical questions. We've got this major project office that's just being kind of set up now. What would you like to see, or what would your members like to see in practice from that office in terms of helping your members or the sector that you represent? And look, it's not the first time we've built big things. What lessons do you think we should be drawing on from the past in terms of major projects and moving this agenda forward that you think are worthy of revisiting today? John, did you want to start?
Maybe I'll kick things off.
Go ahead, Daniel.
So, one project, one window, one review with a 2-year timeline, very promising. We've seen in the past fragmented reviews can delay projects for years, in some cases over a decade. But in many ways, we're focused on all the other stuff because I agree with with Ryan was just saying. Labor instability, how long it takes to get projects moving forward. All of this contributes to our reputation. And one thing we haven't talked about yet, and I think it's also a factor of resiliency, but also on Canada's ability to take advantage of new opportunities and our ability to respond if we are successful on that trade diversification and we see more boxes and goods going through Canadian ports, is the role of Canada Border Services Agency. Which I've worked with them for 20 years. It's a great agency, but not very nimble. And the regulatory environment is quite complex. There are 4 sets of regulations for warehouses apparently, and you have challenges with someone who can work at an airport can't clear a container at a marine port. So there's a lot I think that can be done there, that needs to be done there, because if Canada Border Services Agency can't be responsive and nimble to take advantage of the opportunities we have before us in a timely manner, well, that you can build all the port infrastructure in the world. Their role is really important.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in fact, the other part of the of Bill C5 is really about harmonizing across the country, and particularly in the federal space, there might be opportunities to do that that are very accessible, like the one you mentioned with CBSA. John, did you have a view on that question?
I was just going to say, what we do not want to see the new office be is just another layer of bureaucracy. What we're hoping for is that it is a central location where some decisions can actually be made, because as Daniel pointed out, there seems to be a fragmentation between government departments on what they need and not understanding what other departments need. Initially when I started this job, we deal with Transport Canada. It became very apparent that Transport Canada did not hold all the levers that we needed. Labor Canada had to be involved, Treasury Board. So there has to be one central place where all these concerns and all these complications need to be looked at and a decision being made. And I'm hoping that's what's going to come out of the office, that they will be able to make quick decisions on very complex issues on different layers. Ryan mentioned labor. Most people think that the most important asset in any company or organization is the people. I agree with that. But if their people are always on strike, then you're not going to get much done. So we need to have a framework that deals with that. And I don't mean, collective bargaining. I used to be in the mediation business. The best deal is the deal between 2 parties, no doubt about it. But if you can't do that, you can't keep the country blackmail for months and months and months on end. There has to be a defined period for essential infrastructure operations like rail and ports, where if you can't come to a deal, there is a defined framework with a timeline that will end it. Hopefully to the satisfaction of both parties. Doubtful, but we need to get back to work. We cannot have the supply chain broken. Just an example, last year, the CPKC, first time ever where both Class 1 railways went on strike. It went for 17 hours because the minister realized not only were the railways not working, the ports were not going to work in a couple of days because there was nothing coming in, going out. It paralyzed the country, and we can't have that for such an essential service.
Yeah, I love how wide-ranging this conversation is, and it goes to show just how complex the system is, and what performance of a transportation system entails. It includes all these things, including reliability of all the parts of the system as they connect, like the map I showed earlier. I'm going to edge towards a closing question. I want to leave a little time to go around. There are a few questions that came up in the chat. You've heard the expression elbows up. We're all in this together. It's a Team Canada moment. How do the stakeholders in this chain that could help enable more trade diversification, how do we work together better to help the government accomplish its aims and work with the government to accomplish the aims for Canada?
Well, I'll jump in first on that, Marc-Andre, and I think actually discussions like this are an important first step to doing that, which is hearing from what are aligned but slightly different tinted versions of some of how associations or organizations like ours are approaching this question. I think it is finding areas of common interest in shared advocacy around decision makers when it does come to particularly the federal side. There are, at least speaking from the Ottawa context, a million different people in town advocating for a million different things all the time. And it is very easy, and in fact, not surprising at all that governments, whether they be elected officials or senior civil servants, can pick and choose from what they're hearing based on a range of other political, economic, and government factors. And so I think it's always been important, but I think it's more important than ever in the current circumstance for us to find those areas of common interest. What do we want to see the office do? Where do we have concerns? What are some of the medium and long-term ways then that the major projects office could provide more value in terms of thinking through what our national priorities should be and what the top 100 most important projects could be. I think finding opportunities for us to sort of jointly shared advocate, and not just through trade associations like ours, but through individual members of parliament and all the other inputs that feed into this, because it's a noisy, busy space at the best of times, even more so now. And so I think discussions like this helping bring various partners, stakeholders together to align on not just what they're saying and who they're saying it to, but the way that they're saying it, so that there's absolutely no confusion on the other end about what we would all like to see in the interest of our members or our organization, which is all, again, in the interest of Canadians and communities and families. And we just need to I think, work together better to tie that line.
Yeah. And I certainly remember the going back to kind of 2006, 2005, the Asia Pacific Gateway and Corridor Initiative. I mean, that really brought people together to have these types of discussions in the way you're describing, Ryan. Maybe there's a model to revisit there.
Marc-Andre, I was going to say the same. That was quite highly regarded locally, and I think in particular, it became a roadmap. There was a vision that was created amongst the stakeholders that everyone could kind of wrap their heads around, and to see where this was going and see the sequence of opportunities and projects. There was a plan and a roadmap, and that's where I think it's critical that the federal government can help coalesce various disparate stakeholders to envision a path forward. And I think that's critical. And so, yes, we have that example. We also have the Greater Transportation Collaboration Forum as a model in the Lower Mainland that was led by the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. And in particular, what worked so well with that program is its structure. There was a steering committee, a senior level steering committee. And I think there were 2 or 3 working groups that would meet on a regular basis and arm wrestle and discuss different issues and to coalesce, once again, a vision and a plan. And it's really quite a good document. There's a 2030 plan that's available on the web. But those would be 2 good examples, I would suggest, as a way, as a framework for collaboration.
Yeah. One of the things that worries me a little bit is that I know that the Major Projects Office has got I mean, it's great that they've got a call for submissions of things that they might consider moving through their process, but there doesn't seem to be that overarching vision. I mean, there's headlines like trade enabling, more diversification of trade away from the U.S., but some of those models may be worthy of revisiting.
And sometimes those inputs are onerous, where you have to respond very quickly on a certain project. You have to have executive level commitment to funds on a project that is important, but that was a challenge, I think, with calls of the past. So
Yeah.
I would like to see that.
Daniel,
sustained.
what do you think about kind of bringing stakeholders together? Thoughts, lessons that we could draw that might help Canada?
Well, I think what we're seeing is there's a lot of conversations like this, even more than usual. We're a bunch of us are at an event in Montreal that SODES has put it together with the Port of Montreal, which is really about alignment in the Eastern. There are other groups very active on the Great Lakes, the Chamber of Marine Commerce. The Highway H2O conference coming up. I know there's always the risk that there's a lot of conversations and not a lot of doing. What I am seeing now, though, is an appetite like I've never seen before to be participating in these. Those in government, both on the elected side and on the departmental side, are really eager to understand more. They've been given a new mandate. In some cases, it's a big shift. And there are a lot of people who don't know what they don't know. And so I think fora like this are important and are particularly timely. We're working with some of our colleagues in the marine sector to do something in Ottawa towards the end of November. And really the goal is to reach people that wouldn't normally get to participate in a conversation like this, to understand better how, in our case, marine transport and the challenges and opportunities that need to be addressed there are going to be so central to Canada being successful on this ambitious goal for trade diversification. So there's going to be a lot going on in the next little bit, but it's one of those, I think it's one of those opportunities that comes around once every 5 to 10 years, and you really need to kind of seize it.
Yeah, that's great. John, thoughts on this one, and I'll move to some of the questions we've got in the chat.
I think there needs to be everyone knows what needs to be done. And I am pleased to say that the current government seems to be taking those steps, talking to China now to try to repair our relationship with them, cutting deals with Germany, going to the EU, speaking to Mexico. I mean, these are things that everybody knows that's what we should have been doing 10 years ago, but it's taken this situation to get us there. So I'm very encouraged that we're doing that. But I agree with everyone else on the panel who says we need to keep the conversation going. It's great, everyone can start something, but it's very hard to finish it. We need to keep the momentum going, and we need to start following through, right? Everyone, you talk the talk, but now we need to walk the walk. That's not going to be in a 2-year period. It's going to take much longer for many of these things to come to fruition, but you have to start somewhere with a first step to get anywhere. So I'm very pleased that we're doing that, and we need to continue doing exactly what we're doing right now.
Good. I agree. John, thank you. A few questions that came up in the chat. I likely won't have time to go through all of them, but I'll cherry pick a couple. We didn't talk very much about the Arctic. There was a question about nation building infrastructure in the Arctic to support trade through the Arctic security. Maybe I'll start with Ryan. I mean, ultimately, trade is about shippers and getting goods to market. And getting them to market competitively relative to other jurisdictions that we're competing with for those same goods. Thoughts on the Arctic and how that all plays into this discussion?
I think there's a lot of untapped opportunity in the Arctic. When we think vis-a-vis federal policy, I think for some fairly obvious reasons, there's going to have to be a lot more public investment to take advantage of those opportunities. The private sector cost and ROI to invest and build during a short season with low demand obviously is not there. So I think there is a strong sort of public interest case for increased and sustained public investment in partnership with the private sector to take advantage of some of what the Arctic has to offer. And there's not just a trade component to it. There is a national sovereignty component to how we use our North, and there's actually serving Canadians that already live in the North that have severely challenged access to Canadian goods and food products and other things in a way that makes living there a challenge. So I think this is something that the government understands, but it's going to take some serious investment and partnership with the private sector to take advantage of those opportunities, and that's going to be measured over decades rather than years, I think.
Yeah, and I see some of this as being packaged with wider objectives around defense and sovereignty, security, not just development and extraction and moving goods to market. I think there's a wider context to think about in the Arctic to build the public case. Derek, there's a question that I think you'd be well suited for around inland ports. Where do inland ports fit into this nation building discussion?
Yeah, interesting. It's a subject that's recently come up, and critical. And we can think of terminals, intermodal terminals, sort of coastal terminals that would orient themselves towards export, and then you have inland terminals which may orient themselves to imports in order to get goods to end consuming markets. And then you have those that perhaps do both. And so they're a critical piece of the puzzle. And certainly there's obviously private sector interest and value in having these operating. The railways have their own terminals. So at this point, I can simply say they're a very important piece of the ecosystem. Both in terms of export, stuffing containers, and imports in terms of transloading from rail to truck to distribution centers and warehouses, and accessing retailers and customers beyond. So,
and I think that's a good example of getting more out of existing infrastructure. It complements existing rail network in a way that you might get more resilience, more capacity, more options for shippers to use rail to port for overseas.
It does, and there's sort of new interest in land is at such a premium within our port environments where space is limited, it's expensive to develop. So can you shift capacity inland? A huge current example of that is the Barstow project with BN and BIG, they call it Barstow Intermodal Gateway. That would be an example where this new trend is being considered. And again, it's to create more capacity and to create footprint in our costly ports. So it's in play right now. It's important to think about.
Good. We're almost at the top of the hour. So I think we'll wrap it up here. I think one takeaway for me is that this could very well have been a 2-hour discussion or even a weekend workshop type of discussion. But it's great that we're having this discussion, and maybe there'll be more like them to come. I want to say a big thank you to the panelists, John Corey from the Freight Management Association, Daniel Robert Gooch from the Association of Canadian Port Authorities, Ryan from the Association of Manufacturers and Exporters, and Derek, my colleague here at CPCS. Thank you for sharing your perspectives and engaging this discussion. Fascinating, wide-ranging. Some of the things that stuck with me is that this is a starting point, and there's a lot more to come. And I think these kinds of conversations are going to be critical to make sure that perspectives, particularly of the operators, the shippers, the investors, are at the table and informing and shaping some of those new directions as we continue to do some nation building and achieve some of the aims of that Building Canada Act. So thank you to all the participants for joining. This was a recorded session, and the recording will be available. But I want to thank again the panelists. Great discussion, and more to come.